the legendary Eleanor of Aquitaine. When it comes to great queens, few come close. Her marriage to a duke 11 years younger created a power couple unequalled. She is the mother of two of the most famous kings in history. Her story is one of chivalry, romance, dedication and defiance. She is no kept woman, and her actions against her tyrannical husband would incur a king's wrath. This is her story.
Recap? Oh, I'll check the playlist.
Oh yes, give it a butcher's.
Playlists are fun!
After almost 2 months of traversing the cruel alien terrain of the southern Byzantine lands, with no local guides, where they faced awful weather and starvation, and upon learning that the Seljuk Turks are lurking everywhere, King Louis of France decides to cross via the Phrygian mountains, a quicker but more dangerous route to the Holy Land. And the crusading army crossed through a mountain pass where the king split his forces. The vanguard, left by Geoffroy de Rincon, would press ahead to a plateau that overlooked a rocky pass. There he would make camp. Geoffroy, that is, not the king, and await the rest of the army. A simple plan, easy to follow. But there was a flaw, because Geoffroy de Rincon was chiefly a vassal of Eleanor of Aquitaine, not Louis. He was one of her personal military commanders. What she said went. So it comes as no surprise that the Queen, along with her ladies, decide to join the vanguard. An odd move, and one that will have disastrous consequences. Because when the vanguard arrive at the plateau, Geoffroy, possibly on Eleanor's advice, it's not truly known, appears to have not liked the look of the open plateau. It's too exposed, too windswept. So he changes the plan. Instead, the army would now press on through the mountain pass and continue to the other side. This they did, but there they found only an open ravine, with no protection whatsoever. But with no option to turn back, the van has no choice but to make camp here. Plus, they had also failed to send word back to the king that they had changed their location, meaning Louis was still en route to the plateau, which he found abandoned and empty.
Oh, it was far worse, because what Geoffroy and Eleanor did not know was that the forces of Sultan al-Masoud were watching their every move, allowing this small and insignificant vanguard to pass. Masoud's eyes were set on a much bigger target, the King of France, and once the van had made their way through the mountain pass to the open plains ahead to set up camp, the Turks turned their attention to the main army led by the king, and Masoud's forces came swooping down upon the Crusaders like hell unleashed. From the other side of the mountain pass, Eleanor would not have known that up on that plateau, her husband's army was being cut to ribbons. While she ate around the campfire and drank wine, around 7,000 Crusaders were being massacred, and the baggage train, including all her belongings, was sacked. Catastrophic losses. Later, there were concerns that the French king still hadn't made his rendezvous, as surely, upon not finding the van at the plateau, he would have pressed on through the pass. So Geoffroy, again most likely on orders from Eleanor, sends a scouting party back through the pass to find out what the delay is. And as they navigated the pass and reached the plateau, they discovered the scene of slaughter, finding only remnants of this once great army, and no king. As at this moment in time, Louis was still missing. So what was the fate of the king? I'll explain. The royal bodyguards had all been slain, and King Louis had been sent from his horse, which lay dead in the dust. Injured, and only surviving by fleeing for his life and hiding behind a rock, the King of France was discovered by his chief advisor, Audoudidou. The two had joined the stragglers who were making their way under the cover of darkness through the rocky pass to reach the campfires or the vanguard ahead. There was such sorrow upon learning of the massacre. The next morning, the king arrives at the camp, exhausted and blooded. He was spitting with fury. He banishes Godefroy back to the homeland, stopping short of having him hanged for treason. There were protests, but the king just isn't listening. Most likely because the blame was placed squarely on his wife Eleanor. After all, Geoffroy was her vassal. He took orders from the queen. This must have been her decision, to defy the orders of the king. And as for her punishment, we do not know. It wasn't recorded. Much of Eleanor's time as Queen of France isn't recorded. As I said in the previous episode, we rely heavily on what other people wrote about her, rather than the chroniclers. It feels as though she left a bad taste in the mouth of the kingdom, and all I've told you so far about her exploits is all part of an expanding profile, increasingly working against her, and it will only grow worse. Her marriage to the king is pretty much over by this point, and it won't last much longer. Her days as queen are numbered. Ironically, the one thing keeping this marriage together is Sudra, because even though this is a marriage made in hell, annulling it would be a disaster for France. As for getting to the Holy Land, the hardest part was done, and the king now orders his army to head for the nearest port, Antilea. And from there the plan was to sail to the Holy Land, to Antioch. They were close. They could smell it. On the way, they were harassed by the Seljuk Turks, and food was so low the Crusaders were forced to eat their own horses. Awful. The plight was so bad. To make it worse, Masoud's army had looted the wagon train, so that Eleanor and her ladies had no clothing other than what they currently wore. They were dirty, they were exhausted. But on the way there was a glimmer of light, as they met with an army of Order Knights from the famous Knights Templar, and together they reached the port town of Antilea. For 5 weeks the king's army rested here, gathering their wits, all the while finding enough transport to get the army across the waters to the domain of Antioch, where they would be received by the uncle of Eleanor of Aquitaine, Raymond of Poitiers. The Prince of Antioch, a dashing noble who also swore fealty to the Queen. Louis, the patron saint of jealousy, oh, he's going to be thrilled. By the time Louis had finally managed to set sail for the lands of Antioch, plague and desertion had depleted his forces further. Thousands were left back in Antilea. Thousands more were captured by the Turks and forced to convert to Islam. Louis, the King of France, had started off with around 100,000. Now he has less. This is a king without a clue, Even his voyage across the sea was perilous, as storms lashed the ships for 3 days. But finally, what was left of the crusading army landed at St. Simeon in Antioch. There they were met by quite a crowd, and also Raymond of Poitiers, who welcomed them in. Raymond was a man so handsome and strong, he was nicknamed Hercules, and, despite being the uncle of Eleanor, he was only around 10 years her senior, and they also had a lot in common. The Prince of Antioch was interested in the troubadour culture of Provence, and had imported some of it into the court at Antioch. So for Eleanor, it was like going home, though to Aquitaine, not France. Just without the bawdy, drunken soirees that she had grown up with, because Antioch was a bit more reserved. Still, Raymond did love a good feast, and many were thrown during Eleanor's stay in the kingdom. Also, because her clothes had been stolen by the Turks, Raymond gives the Queen some lovely silk dresses. After all she's been through, I can't blame her wanting some luxuries. Remember that terrible journey through Byzantium, that famine, the storms, the Turkish raids, that horrid sea voyage that lasted 3 days? Eleanor's been through all of it. But I know what you're thinking. And yeah, it is said by reliable sources like John of Salisbury that Eleanor and Raymond spent a considerable amount of time together. The rumour being that this relationship went far beyond uncle and niece. All this is amplified by the growing hatred between Raymond and Louis, as the Prince of Antioch is doing everything in his power to cause the French king harm. But not in a physical way. This is politics. Because Raymond is absolutely frustrated by the king. So, what caused this rift? Because this hatred didn't exist before. Well, while the crusade was advancing across Byzantium, the Islamic forces led by Nur al-Din had invaded Antioch with a huge army. Prince Raymond and the Knights of Alchemar had made them pay for every step they took, taking the fight to Nur al-Din and driving his forces from the lands. So, in 1148, which we are now, the Turks and the Saracens are on the losing side, and Raymond of Poitiers wanted nothing more than to recapture Edessa. Right. The plan is simple. Attack the Islamic lands in nearby Aleppo in Syria, and lure Nur al-Din away from Edessa, where the Christians could retake the city. King Louis? No, because he made that vow to deliver a sacred battle standard to Jerusalem, the Oriflamme. He's obsessed with the idea, meaning he has absolutely no interest in joining Raymond in his war in Aleppo. Because for Louis, it's a pilgrimage to deliver a banner. Yes, that's one side of the story, because as far as the French are concerned, King Louis, the banner is only a part of it. He's heading to Jerusalem to meet up with all the other crusading leaders, gathering a sizable army with the intention to sweep across Alchemar and crush Nur al-Din once and for all. As the argument between the two powerful men escalates, Raymond is doing everything within his power to persuade Louis to join him. But the French king sees this as abandoning the crusade, because it's also a matter of honour, because the French had taken the cross. They had made holy vows, something which the Prince of Antioch had no need to do. He lived here, defending his kingdoms a given. The politics here are deep, very deep indeed. And while all this malarkey is going on, some people writing at the time are in agreement that Eleanor threw away her marriage vows and began sleeping with the Prince of Antioch, while others pleaded the fifth, and they took a vow of silence on the matter. So again, was it love, a fling, revenge, or even political intrigue? As in an ironic sense, Raymond's got Eleanor whipped, and the Queen is supporting the interests of Antioch. So if Louis decides to go to Jerusalem, then he's going without her. Except the jealous king threatens to tear her away from Antioch. It's his royal right, and as queen, she has to obey. Eleanor will not obey. You see, the royal couple are growing more estranged by each passing day, and it reaches a new low when the Queen declared that the royal right meant nothing, as they were too closely related. She reminds Louis that they are cousins, less than a fifth degree in separation. Apparently, Eleanor even tells Louis that them not having a son is God's wrath. Whew! Damn! This is quite the row. Louis, although deeply affected by this, actually agrees to have the marriage annulled, should the church allow it. Later, he'll write to Abbot Suger, who suggests that Eleanor is speaking only in anger. Annulling the marriage would be a disaster for France, and also she has all those lands. She has to remain as queen. The marriage has to work. But if Eleanor thinks she's staying in Antioch, she has another thing coming. Because whether she likes it or not, she's going to Jerusalem. And on the 28th of March, 1148, she is awoken in her sleep and arrested by Louis' soldiers. There she's slung in a wagon and carted off to the holy city of Jerusalem without ever saying goodbye to Raymond. 2 months later, she'd be in the city, and not a single word of what she did there is recorded, even though she lives there for nearly a year. In Jerusalem, while King Louis is hogging all the attention with his fasting, his religious opulence, laying his sacred Oriflamme banner on the altar at the tomb of Christ, Eleanor is not mentioned once. She's most likely disgraced or sulking, or both, and who can blame her? Trapped in a toxic marriage, which she's forced to endure, dragged to Jerusalem against her will, because this is not why she took the cross, to become part of her husband's pilgrimage. It's becoming increasingly obvious that Louis' part in the crusade ends here. At least she had her ladies. We know they're still around, only because we know when they left. We do know that Eleanor was not present when Louis met up with other crusading leaders in the city of Acre, which is probably for the best, as the leaders cannot make up their minds what to do next, and political corruption is rife. Louis is overwhelmed by it all. He's pretty innocent-minded. There was some fighting, towards Damascus, a pathetic attempt to beat the Turks. But after just 4 days and a defeat, the army begins to crumble and fall apart. Many simply desert, abandoning their king. By autumn, the crusade has collapsed completely, though Louis decides to remain in Jerusalem, even despite Abbot Suger warning him to return to France. The king's reason? Not to fight, but to celebrate Easter the next year. What a pillock! During the Christmas celebration, which, yes, was in Jerusalem, the king writes another letter to Abbot Suger, again pleading for the marriage to be annulled. His mind is set on it. So we can only assume that there have been more arguments and tensions between the king and Eleanor. Even though nothing is written, the 11 months in Jerusalem must have had an effect on the Queen, as following this, she's a changed woman. After the Easter celebrations in 1149, which is late April, we're talking the 21st at the earliest, the royal entourage, with whatever is left of this once great army, just 300 people, boarded 2 ships and left the Holy Land en route to France via Calabria in Italy. 2 ships, one containing the king and his retinue, the other containing Eleanor and her loyal ladies. Eleanor and Louis were most likely aware that the King of Sicily, Roger II, was at war with the Byzantine Emperor Komnenos. So, the route could be dangerous if they are mistaken for enemy ships, which is what happens when they accidentally run into a group of Byzantine galleys who were spoiling for a fight. King Louis gives the order to raise the Fleur de Lis, the flag of the Kingdom of France. Only it doesn't work, and immediately the Byzantine ships attack. What Louis and Eleanor wouldn't have known is that Emperor Komnenos has not forgiven Louis, who overstayed his welcome back in Constantinople, and the Emperor had given orders to all his ships to capture the King and Queen, then hold them for ransom. Treachery! While this naval battle raged on, Eleanor's ship was overwhelmed and boarded by the superior Greek sailors. Despite their Amazon theatrics, the Queen and her ladies were no match for the Byzantines. Once they had captured the vessel, the Greeks steered it in the direction of Constantinople. Only, get this, the Byzantine scallywags themselves ran into trouble as several heavy Sicilian galleys spied on the horizon, driving off the Greek sailors, saving both the Queen and her ladies. Oh, and the King, but he wasn't in so much of a pickle. After all, he had all the knights. The naughty Byzantines dealt with, the Sicilians waved goodbye to the King and Queen, who continued on their way to Italy. Unfortunately, there is more bad luck, as a terrible storm not only blows the royal ships off course, but the two are separated during the ordeal, which after we hear no word from Eleanor. For 2 months, there is no word of the Queen's whereabouts, and unlike the fiasco at Mount Cadmus, no one seems to have understood where Eleanor was. And no, she didn't head back to Antioch to have a quickie with Raymond. She couldn't if she wanted to, for Raymond had gone ahead with his war against Nur al-Din, only to be crushed at the Battle of Inab. The Prince of Antioch was captured and beheaded. King Louis also got lost at sea, but he arrives in Calabria, in Italy, on the 29th of July, 1149, around 3 months after the 2 ships set off, and Eleanor is still nowhere to be seen. So the king waits. We know Eleanor is still missing in August because Louis sends word to Abbot Suger that the Queen is lost at sea. He has no idea whether she is dead or alive. He fears the worst. But Roger, King of Sicily, does know where she is, because it turns out her ship was found by the Sicilian king's navy, just off the Barbary coast. If she had landed in Tunis or Morocco, any of those areas, it would have been bad, because these areas have a different attitude to women. They would have sold Eleanor and her ladies into slavery or worse. Luckily, they were saved once again by the Sicilians, who escort them safely to Palermo. But Eleanor is very ill after her ordeal at sea. It'll take her 3 weeks to get better, and finally head to Italy, to unite with the king's retinue. From here on, the royal entourage would be taking a land route, northwards up through Italy, then west towards Eleanor's provincial vassal states, then to France. With the Italian part of the journey, King Roger, a Norman, would give the French king escort, and thus the once great crusading army limped their way north. It must have been a relief, after all they had been through in the Holy Land and that of Byzantium, facing nothing but hostility. Here they were finally in more familiar parts of Europe. Also, the king, Eleanor, and all of the 300 would have known that Rome is on the way, and Rome would also provide the perfect place to grieve, repent, and make peace, especially for the king, who felt the weight of the world on his shoulders, because he was being blamed in the Holy Land by all the princes for deliberately collapsing the crusade. On the way, Eleanor's illness returns. She grows very ill indeed, and like Matilda of Flanders, we do not know if her illness was mental or physical. After all, the Queen has been through a grueling journey. Heck, they all have. She's faced everything: Turks, plague, famine, much death. Eleanor left Paris with 100,000 people, and now the army's reduced to just 300. So she's no doubt utterly exhausted from this alone. Plus, Raymond's death has affected her greatly. The Queen sends funds to donate to the priests who conducted the Mass there, in the hope to save his soul. Thankfully, Eleanor herself is not dying. She still has enough energy and determination to press on to Rome, even if she has to make the journey in several stages. And at one point, they stop at the hilltop abbey at Monte Cassino. It's a popular pilgrimage site. If you've heard of St. Benedict, you know, the man that invented the egg. Seriously, he's the chap who founded the Benedictine monks. He is the father of Western monasticism. His teachings are what makes a monk a monk. And the abbey at Monte Cassino, this is where St. Benedict lived and died. His tomb still rests here to this day, and is just as popular now as it was then. Anyway, here, at the Hilltop Abbey, Eleanor is given the best medicine, and spends 3 days resting from her illness. Much needed rest. Just what the apothecary ordered, eh? While at Monte Cassino, it is learned that Pope Eugenius was hoping to meet the king and queen in person, inviting them to stay at his palace at Frascati. Here they meet the Pope, the Bishop of Rome, who welcomed them all with open arms. Also, Suja has already prepared the Pope about the marital problems, and Eugenius takes it upon himself to try his hand as a marriage counsellor, seeing them each in turn and hoping to heal the rift. The Pope is shocked to learn that the royal couple didn't even visit each other in the bedchamber. Love, sex at least, was very much dead. But love and sex is not what makes a marriage. So the Pope, instead of annulling it, blesses it and makes it clear that in no way they will part. He demands they sleep in the same bed. But outside of all of this malarkey, Eleanor is on the mend. She's well enough to tour nearby Rome, visiting shrine after shrine and acting much like a royal tourist. And the next morning, the royal entourage decides to head back to France, the last leg of the journey. And before they left, the Pope blesses the whole entourage, and filled with tears, they make the last journey for home. On the 11th of November, 1149, on the feast of St. Martin, the King and Queen finally arrive in Paris after around 2 years of absence. Yet, despite all the fanfare, it's hardly the hero's welcome the king was expecting. The barons were angered by the failure of the crusade and looking to point their fingers at the guilty parties, Louis and Eleanor. Take in mind also that the barons in France would not have been privy to the infighting and corruption that Louis would have faced while in Jerusalem. As far as they were concerned, the king and queen made decisions that led not only to the catastrophic defeat at Cadmus, but the reason Emperor Conrad's army was wiped out by the Turks, possibly even the loss of Edessa. Bad decision after bad decision. This no doubt placed great strain on their already failing marriage, as despite the Pope's wishes, there were more arguments. And Eleanor goes as far as complaining she married not a king, but a monk. And right now, it is Eleanor's old adversary, Abbot Suger, who is trying his hardest to keep their marriage intact, as he knows that Eleanor's father made sure there was some kind of a prenup, as if the marriage was annulled, then France would lose 3/4 of her domains overnight, as they belong to the Duchess of Aquitaine, not the King of France. A fact she knew only too well. But it's a losing argument, because the barons are no fans of the Queen. They want her gone. It's only Suger, acting out of sheer desperation, who is trying to secure the future of France. If the royal couple had a boy, just one boy, he could inherit all his mother's lands. With one male heir, France would enter a new glorious period in history. And Suger had the right to hope, because his prayers were answered when, due to renewed efforts in the bedchamber, Eleanor fell pregnant over the Christmas period that leads to 1150, a bitter winter that saw rivers frozen, and all fingers are crossed for a male heir. But hopes were dashed when another girl is born, a child by the name of Alix. Again, the barons are urging Louis to remarry, as Eleanor clearly cannot give males. She's almost 30, any excuse to get rid of her. Still, the only seam that refused to break in this unravelling marriage was Abbot Suger, her one-time rival, now supporter, still convinced the marriage could work. Yet, while the royal marriage was falling apart for that last final time, I'll briefly turn our attention to the Kingdom of England, as there were some developments emerging. The civil war, known as the Anarchy, had been bogged down into a stalemate, with neither King Stephen nor Empress Matilda gaining enough ground to push the conflict in any decisive direction. And as for the moment, the Empress and her forces are confined to Normandy. That is, until 1149, while the French army was returning from the Second Crusade, as a star is rising in the north, a star in the name of Henri Fitz-Empress, the son of Matilda and Geoffroy of Anjou, the Duke of Normandy. That year, Henri lands in England with an invasion force and took the fight to the usurper, Stephen, bent on winning back the kingdom, as it appears that Matilda wants the crown to be placed on her son's head, not her own. All of a sudden, the stalemate is broken, and Henri is only 16 years old. Though this doesn't appear to be a series of successful battles, more a show of strength and a rallying of allies, he's outmanoeuvring Stephen at every turn, but not a pitched battle fought. Then, in 1150, Henri's father, Geoffroy, took his seat back from the political arena. He resigns from his position as Duke of Normandy and bestowed it onto his son. It's a move that greatly angers Louis of France, as it's a title of vassalage. Only the French king can do this. It is clear that the Count of Anjou doesn't see himself as a French vassal. Right, back to Eleanor. Because Abbot Suger is the one and only thing keeping Eleanor's doomed marriage intact. But the next year, in 1151, the elderly abbot passes away, paving the way for Bernard of Clairvaux to step in and finally do the good thing and put the annulment into action. And Bernard himself is an old man, thin, gaunt, and in no fit state to be rushing around. He himself is more than ready to join his place with the other saints. But before he did, there were still two pressing issues that needed to be dealt with here in France. 1. Putting an end to the awful situation with the royal couple. 2. Putting an end to the awful situation between King Louis and the Count of Anjou. Right. The French king had already headed to Normandy with an army, but he had fallen ill, so turned back to Paris, much to Geoffroy's amusement. So Saint Bernard summons the king's vassal to Paris. That way they can talk like good Christians. No need for swords and bloodshed. Sit around a table and parley. Peace. Yeah, Geoffroy laughs this off. He even goes as far as spouting blasphemy at the saint. Shocking, Bernard. It is clear there can be no peace as long as this persists, and the saint makes a prediction that the Count of Anjou would be dead within the month. Yeah, this works. All of a sudden, the Normans are listening, and the Count of Anjou, along with his son Henri, head for Paris. There, Geoffroy explains to King Louis that he still wants his son to be Duke of Normandy, rather than himself. So as a bargaining chip, he offers up a vital piece of land, the Vexin, a stretch that connects Normandy with France, without the need to cross into other vassalage domains. Very good, right. Louis is more than happy with this, and bestows the title of Duke of Normandy onto the teenage Henri, even giving the newly knighted lad the kiss of peace. There would be no war between these two lands. Unfortunately, this meeting would have consequences, as the Vexin would be hotly contested years down the line. And it's the first time that Queen Eleanor saw the handsome young Henri. The two were besotted with each other. Right, who's up for some saucy rumours, eh? After all, we can't have all this politics without a bit of sleaze. It is said that Henri's father, the Count, warned him of Eleanor, told him that she was the property of the king, their vassal. But when the lad laid eyes on her, he fell head over heels, and she cast lusting eyes back. People present on both sides could see where this was going, and rumours began to spread that the two were already bonking behind the king's back. She's over 10 years older than him, the saucy minx. Sheesh, who does she think she is, Mrs. Robinson? This isn't The Graduate. The thing is, the rumour, the sleaze, only really matters in context to the pre-annulment, as we absolutely know for fact that these two did sleep with each other on many occasions, because one day these two will marry. This is where she first meets her future husband Henri, or should I say King Henry II of England. But he's not a king yet, not for around 3 more years. But the die has been cast. The table is set. He'll return to his war against Stephen, where he would soon end the anarchy with the Winchester Truce of 1153. But we're in the September of 1151, where King Louis and Eleanor of Aquitaine took one last final royal tour as a married couple, travelling to Aquitaine. The wheels of the annulment were in motion, and in the March of 1152, their marriage ended. They were no longer man and wife. So they travelled the lands again, this time not as king and queen, but so the king could renounce his claims to all the lands that belonged to Eleanor, because they were hers, not his. A solemn ritual that had to be done. Finally, their ordeal was over. But as for Eleanor, another chapter in her life begins. Just not with France, but with England. And we'll get to that next time.